Joining me now here on the newest episode of Draft Class is another all-star addition to our Draft Class guest list, but he's not just someone who's covered the Knicks for years for both ESPN, now SNY, and not just someone who covers the Nets and the whole NBA for SNY now too, but he's someone who's been an incredible mentor to me over the years since before I started college, just giving me $1 million worth of game for $9.99, as Mr. Sean Carter once said. An amazing, amazing mentor. Ian Begley here on the show. I got to welcome you in, my man. How we doing?
Hey, I appreciate the kind words, Kris. Thank you very much, man. It's been a pleasure. It's been great to watch you continue to do new and different things in the media world. And I wish you nothing but success. It's great to be on with you.
It's great to have you, man. You're following up your friend on the beat, Mark Berman. So as you can't tell, if you don't get the hint, I'm bringing out the big guns here for the guests on the final episodes of the show. Mr. Berman, Mr. Begley, two people that I have looked up to for years for how they do their job. And Ian, man, you just always kill it with your reporting and even your videos, like the putback. I love that show since it started. So I really got to give you your flowers, man, because I love consuming your content. Like I can't get enough. Here on Draft Class, though, we do always start with an autopsy, something a little different. And it's before we talk about who we should, could, and would add to this Knicks young core, it's about looking inwards and looking at what we've got to add to Quentin Grimes to start out. Now, firstly, with RJ, there's going to be a bit of a tone to this question. It's intentional. If he doesn't sign the rookie max, should Knicks fans be running all over the place worried?
I don't think so. I think it would be a business decision if it went that way. I would assume that the Knicks have a number that they're comfortable with, and RJ and people around RJ have a number that they're comfortable with. If they're not able to find common ground before this coming season, it doesn't mean that they won't be able to find common ground the following year when RJ Barrett would be a restricted free agent. It adds a level of intrigue. It would add a level of intrigue to the coming season with Barrett and the Knicks, but I don't think it's a sign that, everything between Barrett and the Knicks is sour and, his future is in question. I mean, look at Miles Bridges, right? The Hornets did not extend him last year, but I think the Hornets are in very good position to retain him now as a restricted free agent. I would assume that they do. I hope for Kenny Atkinson's sake that they do. So these things happen sometimes in the league. If it were to go that way, I don't think it's a doomsday scenario.
Sounds good to me, because you know how I feel about Mr. Rowan. Secondly,
I'm not clear on how your opinion on RJ.
I think he's all right. So Mr. Quentin Grimes, the other guy I have a question about, Knicks fans, especially Knicks Twitter, loves their workout videos. Quentin Grimes, trainer, just the other day put out an update on his offseason progress. He's looking really good. He looks comfortable out there on the court in that video. That's what I took away. He looks really comfortable working hard, which I love. Some videos just came out, though, and I've got to ask, maybe even not as soon as next year, do you think the team sees a bigger role for him going forward than, just 3-and-D? I know at Kansas, he didn't have the best time as a primary, which led to him transferring back home, going to Houston and picking up a different role. But he shined in that role and showed some playmaking chops. Do you think the Knicks see him bringing those out on the NBA level, or do they think they just have a gem of a 3-and-D guy?
Yeah, I would assume that they would like to see Quentin Grimes establish himself more in that 3-and-D area before expanding things into, playing as a facilitator, primary ball handler. But certainly when you look at Grimes and what he did last season when healthy, he gives you every reason in the world to believe that he can thrive in that 3-and-D role. I think playmaking, ball handling, beating your man off the dribble. I know that these are skills that people who have observed Grimes over the course of his prep career, college career, know that he possesses. But I would think in the short term, at least next year, early next year with the Knicks, I would think it's more about, fine tuning and doing more within that 3-and-D role than it is expanding to a shot creator, to somebody who's going to have the ball in his hands a lot.
I agree. He needs to, shine, be a stud in his role and get to that first. It's nothing against him at all. He's just, he didn't play consistently last year until injuries allowed him to. Getting him that consistent role is going to be part of it. And that leads me right to my next question. Now, it's looking like it's going to be a difficult situation with the roster as constructed for guys like Grimes, Reddish, even Deuce McBride. And now with the 11th pick, McBride playing is kind of an afterthought to get minutes under Coach Thibodeau. What do you think the likelihood is that they make a move to free up time for those guys? And if they do, is there anyone, out of Burks, Noel, Fournier, those veteran deals, even Derrick Rose, even though it would pain me to see him go, is there anyone you can see them moving, more than the others to make time for those young guys?
Well, and later in the season last year, I think that, there was a thought externally, other teams felt that Noel would be certainly available this offseason. I don't know how much has changed in that department, but if you're asking like most likely, I would think given the fluidity of the center situation, we have to see how things play out with Mitchell Robinson first. But I think there you look at Noel as somebody who, he's gonna draw a level of interest from other teams, even with the injuries last year, I should say, that hampered him. I think he showed you the year before what he can do when healthy, so he'll draw interest. Now, with regards to like them opening up minutes for one of these younger players, I think it's a little bit tricky because the value of the veterans, a lot of the contracts that they signed last summer, it's not as high as obviously they'd hoped it would be at this point. And I think getting off of those deals isn't as simple as one would hope if you were looking to free up minutes for a young player. I think that, attaching an asset maybe makes it a little bit easier. But, with Alec Burks specifically, at the deadline last year, like the prevailing thought was at the very least, they're going to do a deal that gets Alec Burks somewhere else and frees up minutes for Cam Reddish. It didn't happen then. And that tells me a little bit about how it's not just a slam dunk transaction for something like that to occur. So while there's probably thoughts internally about how that might happen, I don't think anything is set in stone right now with that kind of a move and freeing up minutes for a younger player.
I want to talk about, I got to start with these prospects, man, because there's one that's on every Knicks fan's mind. You just put out a piece on him today on Jaden Ivey. So perfect timing, because on the last episode of the show, as I said, I had Mr. Mark Berman on, and he said that Ivey, I asked him about a hypothetical prospect named Caden Divey, and he said that Caden Divey has been the apple of the Knicks' eye for several months. So do you have any thoughts on this same Caden Divey guy that's floating around? Do you think the Knicks would move up? You wrote about how it would take a package that it's debatable whether they would give it up or not. What do you think about what kind of package would go out from New York's end, and would they do it? To elaborate on that article a little bit.
Right. So with Sacramento, the prevailing thought is that they would be looking for a player who can help you right now, help you win games, this coming season. And so you look at their roster and you look at the Knicks roster, and Julius Randle would be kind of duplicating a player that they just brought in Domantas Sabonis. So I wouldn't think there'd be a fit there. And so then RJ Barrett, I can't see the Knicks including RJ Barrett in most trades, particularly one to move up in a draft, because the idea is to bring young talent alongside Barrett rather than to trade Barrett to bring in another draft pick. So then you're looking at the other young guys, right? I mean, I would think that Sacramento would demand multiple picks and one or two of these younger players to make something happen. And if you're the Knicks, you have to really, really love Jaden Ivey to roll the dice like that, because that's getting rid of the assets that have been accrued over time, going back to Steve Mills, Scott Perry, even Phil Jackson was opposed to trading future first. So this is something, these picks have been built up over time. And so to take that kind of a swing, you have to love Ivey. Mark, I'm not questioning his reporting, but I always think that to say a team loves player X, there's competing opinions within front offices and organizations, especially around draft time. So I'd be surprised if there was a uniformity among the Knicks.
Of course, the Knicks they're not a monolith. Some front office members really wanted Cam Reddish. Some said, hey, maybe we don't need to give up a first. And if, one of those sides gets reported, people think, oh, the Knicks front office hates Cam Reddish. The Knicks front office loves Cam. No, people are people, and people have different opinions on things, right? These are real humans working in these front offices, and humans do not agree on everything, right? So I feel like that fans do that a lot. They think that, oh, Denver loves this player, they're going to give up whatever for him. It's like, no, well, maybe the GM that spoke to that reporter loves that player, but the other assistants all hate him, and they end up convincing, there's a lot going on, and these are workplaces. Not everyone in a workplace agrees either.
But the one thing on Ivy is that the Knicks, I know that they've been trying to gain intel on where Ivy might go, what teams love him, what teams, would not pass on him that are ahead of them. So that tells you about, their interest and what might happen ahead of him and where he might land. And so there's that. But I guess my question in a big picture sense with this club is like, okay, 37 wins last year, disappointing season, playoffs the year before, everybody's happy. Can you, and I think in a perfect world, you do this, you keep going young, but can you go into next year and then come out with 32 wins, but young players who are showing a lot of promise? Or do you feel the need to go out and improve on the win total immediately and try to get into, the bottom four in the East and get back to the playoffs? I just wonder how much patience there would be for them to take a step back in the win total department next season.
I do have to ask you about the draft profile you wrote before this one about Caden Divey on Mr. AJ Griffin. AJ Griffin, is a local product. I joked to Mark that he wouldn't hate the Terrytown practice facility the way that a lot of reporters say Knicks players do. Listen, I got to start here. Do you think he even makes it to 11?
I would be surprised if he did. I know coming out of the lottery, people around him that I trust would be surprised if he did. That would be a precipitous drop for a player that had profiled as highly as he had throughout his prep career. And at Duke, obviously the injuries played a role in what happened, but still the way he shoots the ball and his body type, I'd be surprised if he fell to 11, but there's always somebody who falls, right? There's always a player who drops and is there and is there for a team at the Knicks real estate that maybe they didn't expect to be there. With Griffin, there probably are questions about his injuries, the knee and everything that he dealt with at Duke. And so I wonder if he's the guy who slips, but I still, just given where the league is today, given his body type, given his skill set, I think a lot of people would be surprised if he slips, but somebody's going to slip, right? Whether, Johnny Davis, I don't think it's going to be, Dyson Daniels or Ben Mathurin, but there's going to be a player that's talked about, top 6, top 7, that's going to slide down to where New York is. And that's where things will get interesting.
Right. I know my draft class listeners are aware that AJ is definitely my number one target for the Knicks at 11. Just if he's there, I think that's a run to the podium kind of pick if AJ is there, but it's going to be interesting. I know he just worked out for Portland, and I know Jonathan Wasserman over at Bleacher Report was talking about some new intel he received that would make him think that the Knicks might go Branham over Griffin. Just not Knicks specific intel, but teams seem to like Malachi. Teams seem to be a little wary of AJ with the injury. So yeah, he mocked Branham over Griffin to the Knicks and stood by it. And, I'll always respect those takes because it's like, well, you're putting stuff together. There's a million things you're hearing, but I can't see the Knicks passing on AJ, man. I love him. So we'll see. Speaking of the team though, and bringing guys in for workouts and this and that, they just brought 3 guys in and let the media talk to them as well, in Dyson Daniels, in Malachi Branham, and Ty Washington. Branham's the name that really intrigues me here. Do you think he would be a real consideration at 11, or would he be someone who's a now infamous Brock Aller trade down candidate in the draft?
Yeah, based on that recent history that you're referencing, I would tend to assume that if they loved Branham and they felt like, they could get him a couple spots back, they would do that at Brock Aller 2-step where they go back and they still get their guy. We've seen it several times now. Grimes, McBride. And so it's something that they've kind of made a name for themselves for doing. And with Branham, Jonathan, lives and breathes college hoops, and at this time of year, I do too because of the draft. But I get the sense that he should be there, like at 11. And if he's not, does that mean another player that maybe somebody we referenced earlier drops to where the Knicks are? But that being said, I think Branham is the kind of player where they could drop a couple spots back and he could be there, and then they could gain an asset, as we've seen again past couple of years.
Add something to the war chest there. All right. I know you have to run, but I have one more question. We got to talk about centers. You mentioned it earlier. It was on the docket. Now it's double on the docket because you mentioned it earlier. Mitchell Robinson's a free agent, as we all know. There are two intriguing options at center. I think we'll both go in the lottery in Jalen Duren and in Mark Williams. They both have fans, and they definitely both have haters. Shout out Stacey Patton on Knicks Twitter. Do you think Mitch stays? First of all, do you think he comes to an agreement with the club to re-sign? Maybe they tell him, go find a better offer, and he can't. Or do you know of other teams that are going to be really after the young big man?
Well, we've talked about Detroit forever. OKC had interest before the deadline. I think that changes now because of where they are in the draft. I think there's a couple other contenders, depending on how things shake out with Rudy Gobert, where you could see them coming after Mitchell Robinson. But I think the thing with Robinson and how you kind of look at that center market is, it starts with Ayton and it starts with Nurkic in Portland. And then you get to Mitchell Robinson and you see where he is. So I don't think that's going to be, I'd be surprised, I should say, if that was a minute one thing for Robinson to sign with someone else or re-sign with the Knicks. I think that's going to play itself out based on the centers ahead of Mitchell in the market. At the end of the day, my assumption is the money is going to be at a place where the Knicks end up being comfortable and bringing him back. I know that he's valued by prominent people over there because of the way he impacts the defensive end. Obviously, Tom Thibodeau, defensive coach. And I think that people have maybe earlier in the year, there was more question marks because of his injury history. But over the course of the year, I think people have warmed to the idea of how important he is to the team overall. Obviously, if Detroit comes in with like a $20 million a year offer, I don't know if the Knicks are that keen on going that high. But barring something like that, I would think he's back.
All right, so that is good to hear from Mitch's fans. Say he signs elsewhere and they draft a center at 11. I'm going to throw you for a loop here as a last bonus question. Do you see Tom Thibodeau turning to Noel as a starter? Because he's not starting Sims, and he is definitely not starting a rookie, in my opinion. So do you think there's a world where Noel starts next year, or they would go out and acquire a center, maybe Isaiah Hartenstein, even a quote unquote boring acquisition, as opposed to starting someone like Noel or starting a rookie?
Yeah, I think if Mitch goes elsewhere, I think it would be in a sign and trade where the Knicks are getting something back, or part of a deal where the Knicks needed to create some space or create some money to bring a player back via trade. And then when you talk about that center position, I don't think that the Knicks would hesitate to bring in somebody like a Hartstein or like a Mo Bamba, where you would have what they've had the last couple of years, where Mitchell Robinson, Nerlens Noel, when healthy, you have both of those guys who could come in and protect the rim. I'm not saying that Mo Bamba replicates that skill set, but I think with Noel and another 7-footer who you can rely on to give you minutes either off the bench as a starter, they'd be comfortable with that scenario if Robinson is not on this roster next year.
All right, Ian, thank you so much for your answers, for your time. I know you've got to run, so I'll let you go, but it was great to have you here on the show. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, Kris, always good to be with you, man. We'll talk to you soon.